and start. Welcome, everybody. We are going through the art of war, and we are on chapter 4. The plan today is to read, a couple of people will read, and then read from the chapter, and then we'll go ahead and Jason and Amon will present their translation, and then we'll open it up for comments. All right, that's the format. Go ahead and type exclamation mark in the chat if you would like to read.
Yeah, let me start the introduction about today's chapter. Today we are on the chapter 4, and the title is Formation. Okay, so quick review. First chapter, we talk about the plan. It's just like the very starting point, and Sun Tzu is talking about the 5 things. Okay, the Tao, the heaven, the earth, the general, and the method. So, and then chapter 2, we talk about the evil part of the war, because you have to know the evil part before you know the profit or the advantage of waging a war. And he's talking about the financial plan, how much money costs, and how soon you will burn out your money. So you have to finish as soon as possible. Last week, we talked about the strategy to attack. Okay, basics is talking about Sun Tzu is trying to define how to win. What do you mean, winning? Okay, so you need to know thyself, know thy enemy. Okay, so that's the way. He doesn't say you will win all the time, but you will say you have no danger if you know yourself and know others. That's up to last week. And this week's the title is called Formation. And then for the first 3 weeks, I always said the audience is the prince. And then this week, it's debatable. I think it's gradually changed to talk to the general. Okay, so the prince or the rulers probably still sit on the side, and Sun Tzu turned his head, talk to the general. And for sure, for next week, it's for the lesson is for general. That's my opinion, and also that's the scene I try to set up. But of course, if you disagree, you disagree. There's no solid evidence who is the audience. So today the subject is formation, and it's very short. So we probably can finish a little bit earlier, and we have enough time to discussion overall on this chapter or in general. Okay, so let's start. Among you have something?
I just want to give you a little bit of something on the format. We have to, Jason needs to leave in about 1.5 hours. So we're going to make sure that everything is, covered during that time. Second point is that when we're discussing the verses itself, we'll focus just on the verses, not their application to modern day times, modern day at this point. What we will do is that once we're finished with everything, that's when we're going to go into applications. Right now, first we'll focus just on the core text itself. All right, Amon, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as Jason pointed out, he translated the title of this as Formations, which is apt. I just wanted to read a little blurb here on that title. The character Xing, which is what he's translating, can mean shape, form, appearance, or in a more restricted sense, disposition or formation. The Martial Classics edition apparently followed Cao Cao and titled the chapter Chunxing, shape or disposition of the army. As it will appear, the character connotes more than physical disposition or formation. So I just wanted to read that to bring up the fact that when Sun Tzu is talking about formation, he is not in the strictest sense talking about just the layout of the battlefield and the forces. This is also about the formation of a mentality, the formation of a mindset, the formation of character that goes into warfare.
Thank you, Amon. Let's go with the first reading. It will be by James. James, go ahead.
Okay, this is the Giles translation. It's called Tactical Dispositions in the Giles translation. Sun Tzu said, the good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Thus, the good fighter is able to secure himself against defeat, but cannot make certain of defeating the enemy. Hence the saying, one may know how to conquer without being able to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Next is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, the translation is from James Trapp, and the title is Deployment. The great generals of old first ensured that they themselves were beyond defeat and then waited for the enemy to make themselves vulnerable. Thus, we can say that although you have it in your own hands to place yourself beyond defeat, you cannot, of yourself, bring about the defeat of the enemy. Whilst you are unsure of victory, defend. When you are sure of victory, attack. Defense should indicate that you are not in a position to defeat the enemy. Attack that you are even stronger than you need to be. A skilled defender digs himself in.
You should stop here because.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I think even the title, we already face some difficulty because different translator will use different name, just like Amang talk about the call 行. Okay, so technically it means formation, how to lay out the army, but more than that, because when I do work on the translation, sometimes there's a difficulty because sometimes the same word, he means the visible. Okay, so he will talk about formation, but the formless. So, that got confused, but, just be aware of this word. Second thing is from last week, we talked about stratagem to attack. And that really raised a question, how does Sun Tzu think about defense? Okay, so here he started to talk about defense, but he doesn't use the word as defense. He used the word in Chinese called 不可胜. Okay, and one translation read by Mike is called beyond defeat, right? Is that beyond defeat, defeatable? Something like this. So I translate more on the word by word. Okay, I call it undefeatable. Okay, to this word. So that means you are defense, but not really defense. It just make yourself undefeatable. Not because you are so strong, because you have make no mistake. This kind of concept. Okay, so let's go over the translation Amang and I work on. Master Sun said, okay, every chapter starts with Master Sun said. Okay. In history, those who were good at war first make themselves undefeatable and then waited for the enemy to become defeatable. The ability to be undefeatable rely on ourselves, but the opportunities to win relies on the enemy. Thus, those who were good at war were able to make themselves undefeatable, but unable to make certain the defeat of the enemy. Therefore, we said, one can foretell victory, yet be incapable of acting on it. Okay. So here, the last word talk about one can foretell victory. Because you are undefeatable, so you can foretell your victory. But you cannot for sure or work on your victory because you have to wait the opportunity of your enemies become defeatable. That's the moment you can win. So later on in chapter 6, you may see something different than this. He said, you are capable to act on victory. Okay, it's kind of contract opposite to this saying, but they have some subtle difference. We can discuss later in chapter 6. But here, I think the important message on this paragraph is one can foretell victory, yet be incapable of acting on it. So, Among.
Thank you, Jason. I think what Jason said is absolutely correct, that there is a little bit of contradiction here. But if you follow what I believe Jason has been sort of forecasting, that the audience goes from the highest levels down into the lowest of ranks as we go chapter by chapter, then it's not as much of a contradiction to tell the prince of a land, you can make yourself into a position of invulnerability, of being undefeatable, and then to tell a general later on, no, there's a stratagem by which you can outmaneuver, you can outcraft somebody who is in a good position. And the difference is one of scale, kind of at the macro scale. A society, a city-state, a prince is capable of making their homeland into an undefeatable or an invulnerable sanctuary, whereas on the battlefield, engaged in any given circumstance, it would be possible to still take advantage of an opportunity in someone else's ranks. I wanted to read Mei Yao Chen's commentary on this, because I think it really is succinct. It says, that which depends on me, I can do. That which depends on the enemy, I cannot be certain of. And this is essentially the message I constantly tell my students regularly. You have control over what you have control over, and you do not have control over the things which you don't. So you have to account for those things, i.e. the moods of your professors, but you need to be responsible for the things that you can be accountable for, doing the work, taking the time, putting in the effort, doing the study, etc. So I think there's some universalism to this that sounds unremarkable to us now, but might have been earth-shattering to a prince in 6th century China who is just being told for the first time, you don't have control over the whole world. I'm sorry, it's just not going to go your way every time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amon. Wonderful to see so many hands up. So we're going to go with David, Bill, James, Chris, and Joe. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I think an important, succinct lesson of this is you can't always win. You will not always be in a position that your army or politic will be the winner. But this is what the best do, and this is the best you can do. So if no matter how weak you are, if you can prepare a way to preserve yourself, then the opportunity may present itself to take advantage of the vulnerability that's presented. That's just, don't say you can do more than you can do, but if you can, you know, so it's like, yeah, it's definitely advice for general.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Bill, followed by James. Bill.
Yes, thanks. Let me just put my hand down. Oh, no, let me put it down. Okay. So I want to extend the last two comments with respect to vulnerability and invulnerability. It seems like that distinction between vulnerability and invulnerability captures aspects that are meant by that Chinese word that is sometimes translated as defense. But sometimes the word defense does not really capture the Chinese word, because even an attack plan or an attack path can either be vulnerable or invulnerable. And so the advice is more general than just having an invulnerable defensive position. It's saying even when you're on the attack, you got to watch out to avoid mistakes that would leave your attack plan and your attack path vulnerable. And then with respect to seizing opportunities presented by the enemy, when the enemy makes a mistake that leaves him vulnerable, whether he's on the attack or the defense, that's an opportunity. And I think this will come, this is already relating to the question of disposition, like reading in your enemy's disposition of forces what his plans are. And this will come into play later in this chapter with respect to discerning, know your enemy as a way to know when you've got your enemy, completely vulnerable, because you know exactly what he's going to do in advance. But I'll return to that later. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Bill. Next up is going to be James, Chris, Joe, Ocean, and Evanique. James.
Oh, okay, I don't want to be repetitious. I think Bill got it exactly right. He told us in chapter 3, it's about knowing what your enemy is going to do. You can have all this confidence in your own forces and your knowledge of military tactics and so forth. But on the other hand, if you don't know your enemy, you're only going to win about half of your battles. That was the lesson that he was trying to instill in chapter 3, along with the 5 essentials for victory, the kind of things that the bases that we have to have covered, like not letting non-combatants control the fight, not having a division in our ranks. And here we have the idea of being prepared to avoid defeat, and then waiting for an opportunity to be provided by the enemy. So I think that that's an excellent deployment strategy.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I love the variety of comments and the pithiness of the comments. Next up is going to be Chris. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I don't have a problem with the second part. I think that's, like basically you can say it's control we can control, or the fog of war, where, no complete information can ever be known, right? But the first part, I think, is a little bit confusing for me, because I actually don't believe that anyone can ever. I'm more confused by the translation. In terms of you can ever be put into a position beyond defeat, right? So basically, you can do everything right, you can still be defeated. The invulnerability, I think, is not a message I think he really conveys. I think it's really about being prepared, do everything possible and doing all the right things, but you can definitely still be defeated, right? And the other issue is that I use a quick example of like a combat sport like boxing. So you could be undefeated if you stay 10 feet away from the other boxer, right? You just basically circle him for 12 rounds, but you will never achieve victory either. Maybe you'll just die of tiredness first. You hope the other guy does. But when at the point of your greatest victory, which is you get into the distance where you can actually punch the other person and knock him out, that's also the point where you are mostly at risk, because you're close the distance where he can also have an opportunity to knock you out. Maybe you're better prepared and you have a better chance of knocking him out, but by closing the distance, right, and try to achieve victory, which is what he talked about later, right, which is not only doing defensive. You play offense, you always open yourself up for the chance of defeat. So that's why I think this whole point about putting yourself beyond the chance of defeat it's a weird way of translation. It's never the way I understood the way that he meant it. So
wonderful. Thank you, Chris. I don't know if Jason or Amon have any comment on this one, the idea of invulnerability. If you have, please go ahead.
For the time being, I would just chalk it up to hyperbole.
Sure.
It's a sales pitch to the prince, but there may be something more to it than that.
Got it.
Yeah, I see the Chinese message is talking about this way, and I agree with Chris. That's nothing. I disagree on that. That's true, but unfortunately, Sun Tzu has nothing more to say at this moment. That's what he said in the text.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Ocean. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody's kind of captured already, but is, the meaning behind this particular passage with the idea of knowing your enemy. The only thing I would actually add that may be helpful is essentially is that also, knowing your own self, knowing your own capacity in order to engage with battle is also important. And I think that that's part of what has been kind of talked about already. But yeah, I think, this is ultimately about understanding your enemy and understanding their strengths and weaknesses.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Ocean, Evanique, and Mark. Ocean. Ocean, you
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Oh, great, yeah. Good to join. I'm somebody who applies the philosophy in the real life. So I'm not a big fan of discussing about abstract concept for the sake of abstract. I'd like to use the philosophy I learned in real life. So thus, my thing is to bring the actual historical event which coincide with this philosophy. And a perfect example, I'm sure Jason will agree with me, the perfect example of how Mao Zedong fought against Japan. He knew he could not go offense against the Japanese army. So he was very patient, hiding around and waiting, being patient. And he knew sooner or later, America would join the war and Japan will be undermined. And then when Japan is undermined, it's the point of being defeatable, and Mao Zedong started to be offense. So, but up until then, he was hiding, being very patient, waiting. So that's the perfect example to demonstrate this teaching. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ocean. Next up is Evanique, followed by Mark. Evanique.
Yeah, I have a more modern day example of this, and actually two. One's not so modern, but I always think of this and I think of the Revolutionary War, where how the Americans defeated the British Army. They didn't attack them face on. They knew they had no chance of winning that way, but they waited until the British Army was drunk and like kind of going to sleep, and then they just went in. They saw their vulnerability and they attacked them, and that's how they won their wars. They never attacked them face on because they knew they didn't have a shot. Another modern day example is I should say more modern, is Muhammad Ali. And he said what he would do is he would wear his opponent out. So when Muhammad Ali, for those who don't know, is a boxer. And what he would do is he would just wear the opponent out. Like he would move real fast. And once the opponent was tired, that's when he would go in and go for the win. So I just see that as the modern day example.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Mark.
Thanks. I love the example of Muhammad Ali. I remember when I met him, he was very, very personable. He threatened to knock me out, but luckily I scooted away. I just want to make one short comment on this and two questions. One is that within the dichotomies that we're presented with here of defeat and victory, self and other, there is also a place of stasis, I think, because if we're securing our own defeat, but we're waiting patiently, then sort of implicit in here is that there can be a state of stasis where things are in between. One question, Jason, is in number 4, chapter 4 here, one may know how to conquer without being able to do it. Is the word know the same word as we saw at the end of chapter 3 in know yourself and know the other, know the enemy? And my other question is, oh yes, my other question was this. Is it an empirical question whether to secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands in chapter 2? You know, and I'm thinking we could say those words without wanting them to be empty words, but because in fact, isn't it really an empirical question whether it is in our power? And if we think of people who are under attack right now, they're certainly relying on other people to back them up. And it's not clear when something is entirely within our power or not.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Your question always difficult to answer, but I really appreciate, because you make me think. And another thing, I start to know what I don't know. So thank you, Mark. First question about no. Okay, the 知, okay, that's the same character, exactly the same as the beginning of chapter 4 and the end of the chapter 3. But I translate it different. Okay, the chapter 3, I translate as no. And in chapter 4, I translate as foretell. Because the reason is it have a little bit of future tense because you don't know. The war haven't started yet. How do you know I'm win? So you only foretell you are about to win. So that's my interpretation. And I believe most of the translator doesn't make this different. They just know the victory. So I think foretell would be proper. When you read the Chinese, I believe in my mind, I'm thinking about foretell, not just know. A different kind of know thyself. Okay. So, and second question, I didn't get it. You say in chapter 2, what's the question about? He's talking about an empirical question. You talk about in chapter 2?
Right here in book 4, under verse 2, to secure.
Oh, book 4. Okay, chapter 4.
I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So what's your question?
Is this an empirical claim that is may not always be true, depending on circumstances?
I don't know what would be the proper answer, but I would say, just like Armand said, it's probably a little bit more sales pitch during this time. Yeah. So, so I'm not sure sales pitch you consider as an empirical question or not.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Peter and David, and then we will continue with the text. Peter.
Yeah, hi. Sorry for joining a little bit late. I was kind of listening to, there were two people. I think one is Ebony Q. She was saying something also in reply to another gentleman before her. I kind of want to say that, well, because I think we are on the possibility to defeat and then waited for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. I would say, ideally speaking, one has to, as in the forces itself and the generals, needs to know their own weaknesses in the situation enough to understand that maybe waiting on its own is not enough. For example, the Revolutionary War, I think what Mr. Lindsay was just bringing up earlier was we had a lot of foreign help as well. You know, many historians today would argue that there is probably no USA today without the French and a little bit of other forces. Of course, not the British, because we were fighting against them. And so what I'm trying to say is, whoever spoke before me is absolutely correct on this. It's not I think he was referring to chapter 2, but I'm referring to this, chapter 4 and the first verse here. It's absolutely true that it's not. I don't think anything in the art of war is 100% guaranteed every time. It's more of a more likely than not situation, if this makes sense. I can't think of anything. Only 1 + 1 = 2 is probably true in the universe all the time, but these things are more like, and I also want to say one last thing is, and this, I don't know how people might feel about this, but my latest research has pretty much shown that Sun Tzu might not have even been a real person. The Art of War may have been written by a collective of different generals throughout time in the ancient world. So that's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is going to be David, and then we'll continue with the verses. David.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it's an interesting question that you asked, and I think there's a certain way it casts it into maybe a Western analysis that is natural for us. I mean, your question sounded great to me. Now I'm thinking about it, and it sort of may not work in this text because it may not even work in the East, with the West, because of examples that were already given. Spirit is part of your resources. Is that empirical? I don't know if there's a Chinese test for spirit that's empirical. Your supplies are virtual because you know what you expect to be able to forage and get. You're not carrying all your supplies, you know, so you have expectations. There's some empiricalness to that, but you know, if it's going to be a long siege, it depends on the weather and other things. And what are your limits? What are your troops' limits? And what opportunities will present themselves? So this is making it clear that they're hypotheticals, kind of like the last person said. So I think that some of the essential capabilities of your side, which you have to use and create defenses for, you just have to think, there's a suggestion of conservative defense in preparation. But you know, I don't see that there's an empirical issue there. It's about your knowledge and intuition of the possibilities.
Thank you, David. Jason.
Oh yeah, I just like a quick response to Peter talking about the truth or the Sun Tzu or this book, Art of War. Yeah, I think we don't know. That's true. Okay, there's no solid evidence. But two things I'd like to mention is number one, in Sima Qian, who has a great historian, he writes the great historian, the record of his great historian on the 200 BC. Okay, and he said Sun Tzu is that Sun Wu? And he said Sun Tzu has a 13 chapter, okay, about the book, military strategy. Okay, he said that. But does he read it, this one, or is already lost? We don't know. That's the hard evidence I saw in the text. Okay. Number two, about Cao Cao, it's about 200 AD. Okay, that's it's about 400 years later. Okay, he is talking about, he has a commentary on this book. So if somebody engineer this book, forge this book, it must be before 200 AD. So, you know, I'm not personally, I'm not interested in the truthfulness of the this book, but I see this is a text, just like I think it's Samaritan or some religious which philosopher said, even people prove there's no Jesus, but the Christian religion is still there. So that's my attitude. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's. I think David has a quick point, and then we'll go for readings.
Right.
Joe, first one reading. David, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, yeah. One thing I forgot to say real quick is along the lines of George Washington, the Americans had absolutely zero chance of beating the British without some other resources. So taking this point that is number one here, they had a plan B to protect what they had to have to survive, which was they were going to retreat from Virginia, from the coast, and move inland and away and give up and survive as people in the inner United States. But they knew they had to have a plan to survive. Physically, they didn't have enough material. They didn't have military weapons until the French came along, absolutely, with money and the power of sovereign power that they couldn't acquire. So this was kind of in effect, you know, they knew what they had to call success. And there was no way with the material they had that they could just have a war and win.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Let's continue. Joe, if you could read the next one.
Okay, tactical dispositions. Security against defeat implies defense tactics. Ability to defeat the enemy means taking the offensive. Standing on the defensive indicates insufficient strength, attacking a superabundance of strength. The general who is skilled in defense hides in the most secret recesses of the earth. He who is skilled in attack flashes forth from the topmost heights of heaven. Thus, on the one hand, we have the ability to protect ourselves. On the other, a victory that is complete.
Thank you. Who would like to read another translation? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to read another translation. If all else fails, can I call on Aman? Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Let's see. Therefore, I said, invincibility lies in the, I have to see exactly where to stop because this is a little different than the other writings. Seek to win. Okay. Very sorry. All right, there we go. Invincibility lies in the defense, the possibility of victory in the attack. One defends when his strength is inadequate. He attacks when it is abundant. The experts in defense conceal themselves as under the ninefold earth. Those skilled in attack move from above the ninefold heavens. Thus, they are capable both of protecting themselves and gaining a complete victory.
Okay, this paragraph is short, so let me this one. Just 1 minute. Okay. To be undefeatable is to defend. Again, Sun Tzu put a lot of words defend here. Okay, and others I think here has most defend here. Okay. To be undefeatable is to defend. To defend the enemy is to attack. Defend when it's insufficient, attack when abundant. The good defender hide themselves under the deep earth. Okay, and I put a parenthesis, 9 devil down. That's the word-to-word translation. The good attacker act from the top of the heaven, and the word is 9 devil up. Thus, they can protect themselves and have total victory. So, of course, we should not take the 9 devil too seriously. I believe that's rhetorical or sales pitch, if you want to say, but I think that's a good metaphor talking about the concept of defense and attack. When you attack, you should feel you are in the 9 devil high of the heaven. And when you are defend, you should feel yourself is 9 devil down under the earth. So I think that's he want to say. Okay, thank you. Aman. Sorry, I have to step out.
Sorry, I was anticipating a question here about the idea of defend. So I wanted to get the etymology out there in one go. Yeah, this is very flowery in terms of language. To the ninefold or 9 levels up or 9 levels down, to be defended below the earth or to attack from the heavens. But there is something, if you look closely, the undefeatable is to defend. You are undefeatable when you are in a defensive posture correctly. Defeat is capable when you are attacking. And this was something that was being talked about before. You open yourself to a line of attack when you must attack, when you are the attacker. defend when things are insufficient, attack when they're abundant. I think we can all kind of see the sense in that. The idea being, it costs more to attack than it does to defend. And there can be a lot of logistical argument about this, but on the defense, time is on your side. When you are, and we've seen many guerrilla encounters over many a time of protracted wars where the defender of their land have had time on their side, and even in a position of great insufficiency against a force of great abundance, and I could think of any number of examples, that stratagem, that sticking to that stratagem actually ensures a victory much more so than sort of throwing caution to the wind and throwing yourself pell-mell at your attacker when you're in an insufficient position and when you're would be able to defend yourself. I won't go through historical examples. We could think of tons of these, but again, seems very common sense now, very revolutionary at the time, because there was heroics in going into battle against innumerable odds, against insurmountable odds, throwing yourself sort of on the sword of your attacker for your greater glory and honor. And Sun Tzu's message here is, that's a terrible way to win a war. That's a terrible strategy for victory. It may get you sung about a generation or two, but it will also get your homelands taken and your dynasty and name erased from history within a very short while. So Sun Tzu thinks in terms of a very long game here. And that was something he fostered in the Chinese diaspora and the Chinese culture at large, was to think strategically very long term, not in terms of immediate engagement or immediate battle, but what is this going to mean to my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren, and what can I do now to ensure their future?
Thank you, Amon. Again, it's wonderful to see so many hands up. So folks, we've got about 45 minutes to finish this entire chapter. So keep your comments concise. All right, let's go ahead. Bill, James, Chris, Peter, and Joe. Bill.
Thank you. I just have a question about the word that modifies heaven and the word that modifies earth, which has been translated as either deep or ninefold. I'm interested in the ninefold translation. Like, what's that getting at? Like, the Chinese word that's been translated as ninefold, are there other translations of that Chinese word that access what the author meant by ninefold?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. Well, the word that he uses is nine, number 9. Okay. So I don't know how about other translator, but I believe most of the time 9 has been used as highest number. Okay, because if you do one single digit, 9 is the highest, and the Chinese traditionally try not to go to the top, which is 10. Okay, which a little bit Taoism thinking, but that's the word is 9. I think it means high and low, very deep and very high. So I hope I answer your question. Unless you have other question.
I would like to add to it, Jason, just by pointing out that this is also something of an ancient traditional cosmology of China, in to think of both the heavens and the earth as layered or stages of existence.
And what about the English expression "to the nines"? We're going to do this to the nines. No, I'm sorry.
Not identical, but you'll see that we colloquially use idioms like this that don't necessarily have an easy graspable etymology. And I would say ninefold heaven or ninefold earth would be very similar. Even in Sun Tzu's time, they wouldn't necessarily harken back to the ancient cosmology by which this originated.
Thank you. Next up is going to be James, Chris, Peter, Joe, and Allison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, this idea of defensive security against defeat. In other words, people have been talking about this. How do you know you're not going to be defeated? How do you know you can defeat the enemy? Well, if you're going to do it, the defending yourself has to do with your defensive tactics and your defensive strength, the ability to defend your territory and your positions. Being able to defeat the enemy means able to surmount the enemy on his own territory or on whatever territory is being contested, so that the enemy is routed in that case. So this is a kind of like it's both power and mental preparation. The idea that there has to be the confidence in all through the ranks of from the leadership down that can accomplish this kind of movement. And I love the boxing analogies. I think they're great. And then standing on the defensive and is an indicator of insufficient strength. That's probably true, because if you're not on the offensive, being on the defensive indicates insufficient strength. I play poker, and this is like all applies. Attacking, it implies that you have an abundance of strength. And then the last one, above, I mean, look at Ukraine and the importance of drones. It's very likely that a lot of the positioning in the war has to do with drones. And look at the Vietnam War with the tunnels. Could they have possibly, the Viet Cong, have been possibly as successful defending against the Americans without the tunnels? So in this case, the secret recesses of the earth. I mean, it just makes so much sense. If you can create great strategies underground, great strategies in the sky, and you want a victory, you come from above. You're striking flashes. He who is skilled in attack flashes forth from the topmost heights of heaven. I mean, strategic bombers maybe, but it's great ideas.
Thank you, James. Next up is Chris. Folks, let's try to keep focused on the text, because I'm worried we have got only about 30 minutes left to finish everything. Chris, go ahead.
Okay, time goes fast. So I think I'll just follow up on Amon's point. So for me, I also interpret this text from a skill level. So you defend not only when you're forced to defend because you don't have sufficient strength, but also because you feel that your skill level defending is higher than the other party's skill at attacking, right? And then you let them make all the mistakes. So, like I'll leave with this. I mean, like, whether it's boxing or chess or tennis, it's actually interesting at the intermediate level. You find the people who win the most are normally defensive tactic specialists. It's not until you get to the highest level, you start to see the offensive player really dictates most of the winnings. It's because offensive action is actually very difficult to execute perfectly and correctly. You do leave yourself open, you make mistakes, and defense is safer. So I just want to add that. I'll stop.
Thank you, Chris. Next up is going to be Peter, followed by Joe. Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to say a really quick follow-up to what Chris was just saying, but also what James was also saying as well. It's just putting all together instead of answering one to another. I agree with the skill level thing with Chris, because from personal experience, but also from a lot of history examples. So personal experience is when I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there's a ranking like in the middle for adults. It's called the purple belt, right? There's the white, blue, purple, brown, and black, and then to different degrees of black. that right in the middle is usually considered where you actually find what you're good at and what you suck at. You kind of go on from there. And as I went through Brown and eventually to second degree Black, modern day, I realized that defending, well, of course, because of my skill level, but I'm not saying, because the reason why I think Chris made a good point is because if you don't think about skill level and you suck, but you don't know it because you're ignorant, then you think I'm going to defend. You're going to get crushed by, and this is my follow-up point, by a historical thing, over and over again by someone like Alexander the Great. He took over his known world in very fast amount of time for his technology. But of course, Among also said this at the beginning, that the antithesis of the art of war, which is long-term planning by Sun Tzu's writings, the Macedonian Empire by Alexander was definitely the opposite of long-term, because the empire died as soon as he died. So there's a trade-off for conquering so fast. But also at the defense thing, I agree with Chris. You got to consider your skills, because sometimes, I hate to say this, but you're effed no matter what.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is Joe, followed by Allison. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, James had actually taken a lot of the examples that I wanted to talk about. So when you're either talking about Afghanistan or Vietnam or things along those lines, where the terrain is actually so important. But one of the other things that actually is very important when it comes to defense is the idea of deception and also gathering information about your enemy as well. I think that those are two important key elements to defending yourself, because then you know your enemy as opposed to actually just sitting back. And these things are can be used and applied to anything. If you're especially in circumstances of like business or things along those lines, you have to know your competitors, but very well, and you don't spy on them per se, but you have to know them. And this comes back to the ultimate thing of knowing your strengths and weaknesses. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Allison, Ocean, and Mark. Allison.
I think like what Aman was saying about the defense is the American Revolution is a really perfect example of that, because although America declared their independence from England, they didn't get on ships and go sail to England. They stayed right where they were, so that the English had to come to them. And this is the land that they knew. And then they incorporated, basically guerrilla techniques from Native Americans, where they would just jump out on them, and they weren't, they completely ignored the formations that the British had always used. And so by really using the land that they knew and then using the knowledge from the people who were already here, that's, in large part how they won the war against a military that was so much stronger than them.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next up is Ocean, followed by Mark. Ocean.
Oh, okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So historically, people took lesson from this teachings. Also, while they were patiently waiting for the enemy to defeating themselves, they would use a spy, for example, to have the British Empire conquered countries to divide and conquer, whispering the ears to each tribes. Other tribes is going to get you, but don't worry, we're gonna help you, and fight among themselves. And both tribes are gotten so weak, then they took over everything. So while you being patiently waiting, you softly, covertly, undermine their power. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ocean. Next up is going to be Mark and Madeline, and then we'll go to the next verses. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks. I was just wondering about the reference to heaven and earth here. And it seems like this might be a support, Jason, for your idea that there's a turn towards the generals here. Because in chapter 1, in the 5 basic principles, both heaven and earth occur. So we would understand that the general would have to master both heaven and earth in some way. But here, it's almost as if he's addressing the general and he's saying, if you're skilled in defense and you're that type of general, then you have to stick to the earth. And if you're possibly another kind of general, i.e. you have to know yourself, then you may be acting more from attack.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see. Next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Srividya, and then we'll continue. Madeline.
Yes, thanks, Shrikant. Thanks, Jason and Aman. I just wanted to add an additional facet to what David and Allison said about the Revolutionary War. Even before then, when various Europeans arrived on the continent, there were groups like, say, within the Algonquin, a larger Algonquin group, who were already at war with each other. There might be a war of one group against another. There might have been a three-way war. So from their perspective, some of them were looking at how can we use the French? How can we ally with the Spanish? How can we use the English to help us in our war, which is the primary war? It didn't work out very well for them, but it was an entirely different perspective on the relationships between the two cultures.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Next up is going to be Srividya, and then we'll continue. Srividya.
Yes, I missed the chapter 1 session. So from online, I do understand that the earth comprises of distances great and small, dangers and security, open ground and narrow passes, chances of life and death. And in this chapter, the deep earth, does it mean the same? And the high heavens refer to the same heavens which we talked, which was heavens as in chapter 1, or are they different?
Let me answer this question. Great question. Yeah, because I'm about to talk about this. Just like Mark talked about, one way you can look at they are different. In the first chapter, talking to the prince, okay, talk about heaven, and my interpretation, heaven is something timing, something more unpredictable, okay. So, and earth is talking about our terrain, our ground. What's your marketplace if you take as a business? Okay, what's your territory? You are talking about the domain of your fighting. And this one, I think we can take as metaphor, right? 9 levels of heaven, that means very high as attack, and then 9 levels deep on the earth, okay, as defense. So another way you can look at this one, attack is more unpredictable. You have to rely on many, many things. It's nothing, not the thing you can act on it, but you have to be ready on that. But the defense is the thing you have to guarantee. Okay, so in this way, you can say they are the same idea. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So folks, we will have to wrap up this chapter in the next 30 minutes. And then we're going to have a discussion of metaphors in Chinese and comparing them in metaphors in English. So Jason, we've got 30 minutes. Do you want to just go through all the verses together now and then do the discussion? How would you like to do it?
No need. My 30 minutes is not like a hard limit.
Okay,
so,
okay, very good. Very good.
So let's go this one, because the next 2 chapters are not that long, and then I think we can deal with by this time.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I stay within your limits, your constraints. Please go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to read. James, can I volunteer you? Okay, thank you. Oh, okay, very good. So James followed by Evanique. James. James, go ahead and unmute, please.
Okay, I'm going to try to do it. I have 2 different versions, and one is more readable. To see victory only when it is within the ken of the common herd is not the acme of excellence. Neither is it the acme of excellence if you fight and conquer and the whole empire says, well done. To lift an autumn hair is no sign of great strength. To see the sun and moon is no sign of sharp sight. To hear the noise of thunder is no sign of a quick ear. What the ancients called a clever fighter is one who not only wins, but excels in winning with ease. Hence, his victories bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage. He wins his battles by making no mistakes. Making no mistakes is what establishes the certainty of victory, for it means conquering an enemy that is already defeated. Hence, the skillful fighter puts himself into a position which makes defeat impossible and does not miss the moment for defeating the enemy. Is that right? Is that the right ending? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is Evanik.
Yeah, sure. Mine's is the exact same translation.
Okay, then let's go with Amon. Amon, could you, wait a minute, David has his hand up. David, go ahead. Which translation will you be reading?
I'm sorry, no, I have a thought, not
No,
a reading.
that's fine. Okay, so then let's go with Amon and then we'll come back to you. Amon.
Okay, verse 3. To foresee victory, which the ordinary man can foresee, is not the acme of skill. To triumph in battle and be universally acclaimed expert is not the acme of skill. For to lift an autumn down requires no great strength. To distinguish between sun and moon is no test of vision. To hear the thunderclap is no indication of acute hearing. Anciently, those called skilled in war conquered an enemy easily conquered, and therefore the victories won by a master of war gain him neither reputation for wisdom nor merit for valor. For he won his victories without erring. Without erring means that whatever he does ensures his victory. He conquers his enemy already defeated. Therefore, the skilled... Oh, wait, I want to make sure I'm... Yeah. Therefore, the skilled commander takes up a position in which he cannot be defeated and misses no opportunity to master his enemy. Thus, a victorious army wins its victories before seeking battle. An army destined to defeat fights in the hope of winning. I think that's right, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I missed my last stanza. Thus it is in war, the victorious strategist only seeks battle after the victory has been won. Whereas he who is destined to defeat first fights and afterwards looks for victory.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, this one, I like this chapter, this paragraph a lot because it's a good description and easy to understand and also deliver important message. So, foreseeing victory as typical per people expect is not best of all. Fighting, winning, and then hearing good words from the people around the world is not best of all. It's like lifting a thin feather is no sign of strength. Seeing the sun and the moon is no sign of clear eyes. And hearing thunderclap is no sign of acute ears. Historically, those who were good at war defeated the enemy promptly when the enemy, were defeatable. Therefore, their victory brought them neither a reputation of smartness nor attainment of courage. Thus, they won by making no mistake. Those who make no mistakes are certain to win by their action because they are defeating those who are already defeated. I think this is very important, right? When I read this one, through the history, the victory brought them, the true victory brought them neither a reputation of smartness nor attainment of courage. Okay. So when you say somebody is very courageous in the war, that means you already lose, like Achilles, right? So this kind of thing, that because you are doing wrong thing, that's why you get reputation of smartness and you get the reputation of courage, because you already have some mistake on the high level. Otherwise, you don't need to use your smartness, you don't need a brave soldier, right? So I think that's to me, that's very important message in this sentence. Last one. Hence, those who are good at war stand on the undefeatable ground and never miss the moment when the enemy becomes defeatable. For this reason, the victorious army first foresee the victory and then seeks the moment to fight. The failing enemy first fights the war and then desperately seeks to win. I think the last sentence also very important, right? Just not only in the war, also in any business, any action, you make a plan, you know you are going to win, you are going to make it. Then the rest, you just execute the plan. Not like other failing army, right? They fight first, bravely, smartly, and then they are seek to win. Okay? So that's the different attitude. And I think this one is very important. At least to me, I think that's a very good lesson to remember in the daily life. Yeah, thank you, Aman.
I have to say, this is a great chapter or a great verse for all the boxing and fisticuff martial arts metaphors, because I don't know anyone who's stepped into the ring more than a few times who hasn't once had the experience of, and then I was just fighting for my life, because I did not know how outclassed, how outmatched, how outnumbered I was. If you've never fought against somebody who outstrips you to that degree, then you never really tested your skill set enough to find your own limitations. It's a great arena for having that experience in a relatively safe regard compared to warfare, where what he is saying, it seems really simple. Great soldiers don't go into questionable fights. Great generals, great soldiers, great military tacticians went into unquestionable fights. And therefore, it wasn't a thing of great glory or great gain. It was just a day's work, full stop. However, when you are fighting first and then figuring out, is there a way I can actually win this? You've already lost. You have already missed the very first part of the lessons, know thy enemy, know thyself, which is why I think the ring is a great metaphor for this, because if you knew you were outclassed and still got into that ring to test your skills, good on you. You're a brave person, but you didn't expect to come out a winner. If you went in there thinking that you were going to walk out, not with a knockout in 2 rounds, and by round 3, you found, oh my God, I didn't do enough conditioning. Yes, I am speaking from some personal experience here as well. Then you have had the real terror of, can I just survive till this is over? Somebody please throw in the towel and save me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aman. This is so beautiful, Jason. I mean, I really love this, because this is very Taoist. This is saying, just focus on the Tao, accept it, and then, do the Wu Wei, so you don't have to do anything else. You're just working with the Tao. So I think it's just beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Next up is going to be David, Bill, and Chris. David.
Yeah, this is lovely. This is sort of talking about the construction of the internal process and the invisibility of what's going on. So I want to bring this to other realms than war just for a second. But the skill in anything, he's saying, makes the difficult easy. So Mozart done well sounds like a child playing. It just is so natural. Everything is just relaxed and comes through. But it's actually like the hardest thing to do, right? It's kind of a contradiction. So there's a warning that the depth of prepared skill isn't really visible when you're looking. You know, where's the iceberg? It's not what you're looking at. So it allows, I mean, the actual skill allows the person to see what's unseen to everyone else. And so that skill is invisible. It's unseen as a skill. Even the results aren't enough to measurement, you know. So it's not an empirical thing again, Mark. Finesse makes dancing look easy, but so that's how it looks, but it's actually power and invisible practice and muscles that have learned to work. So the reason it flows is all this preparation and the relaxation into the defensive attitude until something is ready to call you and you're moving through in a way that you're knowing where you are. It's very cool.
Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Bill, Chris, Ocean, and Joe. Bill.
Thank you. He, in this paragraph, lists a number of things which are good, but they're not the acme, not the zenith, not the height of excellence. And then he lists the one thing that's the height of excellence. And that is making no mistakes means conquering an enemy that is already defeated. It means only seeking battle after the victory has already been won. It seems to me that this refers back to chapter 1, paragraph 5 in the Giles translation, where it says that all warfare is based on deception. Quote, hold out bait to entice the enemy, fake disorder that your own side is in disorder, and then crush the enemy from that after that fake. Fake that you are far when you are near, fake that you are unable to attack when you are able to attack. So this is what creates the opportunity to be certain of victory and to seek battle only after your victory has already been won. Because when you've got the enemy thinking that you're weak when you're really strong, then he's going to implement a strategy that's optimal for you being weak. And that strategy of his is going to be very suboptimal for you when you're strong. If you can get him to think that you're far away, he's going to implement a strategy that's optimal for you being far away, but it's going to be really suboptimal for if you're really close. If you can fake to him that you're in disorder, your army or your people are in disorder, he's going to adopt a strategy that's optimal for you being in disorder, but it's going to be very suboptimal for you being in good order. And once you've got him pursuing a strategy that's so suboptimal for your real capabilities and your real position, et cetera, then you've got victory before you even enter the battle. He's already defeated because he's got the wrong strategy. So I wanted to put that out there. I think that's what his point is when he says that this kind of victory for assured in advance is the height of excellence, because no matter how good you are in all those other ways, if you have not mastered this skill of the right fakes and the right deceptions, then you're always going to be taking a chance when you enter battle. So I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Bill. Next up is Chris, Ocean, and Joe. Chris.
Yeah, I resonate with what Shrikant said. Like, I think it's very Taoist, from a Chinese point of view, or very Zen-like from a Japanese point of view. Reminds me a lot from another Asian classic book, the Book of Five Rings by Musashi, where really there's two focuses. One, you're really always focused on the task at hand without being influenced and perception of external influences, right? The task is the task, is your task. And second, you're not competing with anyone else. You're trying to perfect and better than what you were yesterday, right? So it's just the ever nonstop improvements and being prepared. And I think the way I interpret the lifting the hair and the sun is that you should be doing something really, really difficult, but you make it look like you're lifting a hair or you're just watching the sun and moon. So everybody else by watching you think they can do as well because it looks so easy. But in actual reality, it is not easy, right? So that's the goal, that you can make it look effortless when it's actually not effortless. And therefore that you really discount, like the really, go back, I'm kind of repeating, is the external feedback, you really had to discount that, right? In terms of the either the criticism or the praise that you're getting from the third party, because the ultimate measurement, if you're honest on your own feedbacks, that really should trumps over everything else. I'll stop here.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Chris. Great observations. Next up is Ocean, followed by Joe.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the key word here is the herd. So you are not good military general when the herd can easily predict, or common people can predict that the destiny of the war. And as Jason said, it's totally parallel to the business world. If you take a look at historical examples like legendary, multi-billionaire stock people like a John Templeman or a Warren Buffett or those geniuses, they buy certain stocks way before those millions of herd start buying. In other words, right before the stock crash in 1929, even the people at herd, Shoeshiner, can borrow large sums of money in speculation and buying the stocks and make a fortune. Of course, a few weeks later, that stock is going to go down radically, and everybody lost the money except the one who bought those stocks way before and sold out. So, so people who does the can see the things that most common people can never predict. People like Warren Buffett or Joe Templeton, so they can foresee certain stocks or a certain world's destiny way before the herd can predict. So that's the distinction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ocean. Now a comment from Joe, and then we're going to go to the final set of verses. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I see one of the key, because everybody's kind of covered a lot of things already, one of the key things is a clever fighter is one who not only wins, but excels in winning it with ease. And if you think about it in terms of strategy in chapter 2, he talks about in paragraph 3, passage 3, the skillful leader subdues the enemy troops without any fighting. He captures their cities without laying siege to them. He overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. And it's kind of consistent with that. And it also talks about the idea of not attacking walled cities as well. And so you're heading into so this is the idea. You're not heading into battles that you ought not be going into. Thus, you're winning with ease. And there's a bigger thing to be considered here is at a higher level. That's somebody that's acting, prudently about when they go to war. So they're not necessarily just rushing into war because they're not going into situations that are basically where they'll lose.
Thanks, Joe. Let's have reading. Evanik, you didn't get to read last time. Would you like to read this time?
Sure. So, okay, so I'm a little confused because I think I'm supposed to start at 16.
Jason?
The consummate leader, or
That's correct. That's correct,
Yeah.
Ebony.
okay. So the consummate, and where am I stopping? Just so I know.
At the end of the chapter, number 20.
Thank you. The consummate leader cultivates the moral law and strictly adheres to the method and discipline. Thus, it is in his power to control success. In respect of military method, we have firstly, measurement, secondly, estimation of quantity, thirdly, calculation, fourthly, balancing of chances, fifthly, victory. Measurement owns its existence to earth, estimation of quantity to measurement, calculation to estimation of quantity, balance of chances to calculation, and victory to balancing of chances. A victorious army opposed to a routed one is as a pound's weight placed in the scale against a single grain. The onrush of a conquering force is like a bursting of pent-up waters into a chasm of 1,000 fathoms deep.
Thank you. James, would you like to read a translation which is different?
No, I don't have a different translation.
Amon, would you like to read a different translation?
Sure. Let me just make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay. Those skilled in war cultivate the Tao and preserve the laws and are therefore able to formulate victorious policies. Now, the elements of the art of war are first, measurement of space, second, estimation of quantities, third, calculations, fourth, comparisons, and fifth, chances of victory. Measurements of space are derived from the ground. Quantities derived from measurement, figures from quantities, comparisons from figures, and victories from comparisons. Thus, a victorious army is as 100 weight balanced against a grain, a defeated army as a grain against 100 weight. It is because of disposition, i.e. formation, that a victorious general is able to make his people fight with the effort of pent-up waters, which suddenly released plunge into a bottomless abyss.
Thank you, Amon. Jason.
Okay, that's the last one for this chapter. Okay. Those who are good at military operation practice. Sorry, let me start. Those who are good at military operation practice Tao and adhere to the method of law, so they have the power to control the outcome of war. So first, I think the translation is moral law. Okay, practice moral law. I totally disagree, because the word is Tao here. So I direct translates 修道, practice Tao, okay, or cultivate Tao. And then talk about 保法, that's the word. I think we should translate as method, so method of law. So, and then it followed by the next sentence. And remember, he put the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this 5 is not 5 items, that's a continuous, right? One produce the second one produce the third one. So sounds like it's a step-by-step method to bring you to the victory. Okay, so it said the military method. First, the area. Second, the quantity. Third, the number. Fourth, the comparison. Fifth, the victory. Then Sun Tzu is going to tell you very specific. From the ground, we can designate the area. I put a parenthesis because I think that's what it meant. So from the ground, we can designate the areas of battle. From the area, we can estimate the quantity of provisions. From the quantity, we can calculate the number of troops. From the numbers, we can compare our strength with the enemies. And from the comparison, we can foretell the victory. So it's kind of, one from the ground all the way to victory, 5-step process bring you to victory. I think the American Revolution, okay, war is a good example, right? From the ground, I think who talked about Edison, right? So that's a great example to think through. Okay, and the last one, the victorious army is like a pound weighted. I'm sorry, the victorious army is like a pound weight against a grain. The failing army is like a grain weight against a pound. The victorious fighter would be like the bursting dammed up water rushing into a creek thousands of feet below. This is formation. So the last sentence is very important, and then I think they lead to next week. Okay, we call it shi. And then, but here he calls it formation. So Chinese, so this chapter, the title is xing. I translate as formation. And next chapter, the title is shi. I call shi. I refuse to translate to any English word. But these two words together, xing, shi, means circumstance, situation, our environment in the common Chinese language. So it's interesting. Sun Tzu put xing here. And yeah, I think the next week we will spend probably much more time to discuss what's the meaning of shi. And please just remember this description. The victorious fighter would be like what? Bursting, dammed up the water, rushing into a creek thousands of feet below. That's Sun Tzu is talking about shi, or you want to call it xing, and then in this kind of situation. So I think that's I will have to say for today. I may have to leave anytime soon. So I will leave to Aman, Shirin-Kang, and everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. And I'm just delighted that we managed to finish only 2 minutes, I think 1 minute, 10 seconds late. So sorry about that, but that was close. All right, folks. So what we're going to do is that we are now, first we'll go to Aman, and then comments. And then after our discussion of this chapter, we're going to be talking about metaphors in Chinese, the nature of metaphors in Chinese. So Aman, go ahead.
So since this is the opening to the open conversation, I'm going to take advantage of it because this passage gives a perfect opportunity, because Sun Tzu offers a metaphor right at the very end: water crashing from a height pent up into an abyss thousands of feet below. Really powerful metaphor. It's a beautiful image. It's evocative. And that's not something you think of when you think of a military strategy text, but it is necessary to capture your audience's attention, to get them to start to think in terms that you want them to think. And I've discussed many times throughout this session how the landscape and the method of warfare, what had been undergoing a sea change of this time, from chariot, formal ritualized warfare, into fielded, conscripted soldiers in ranks and ranks and ranks. These are very different animals. And so when you're speaking to this audience, you want to speak their language. Many people in here in the discussion mentioned some very Taoistic ideas, and I love turning Taoist into an adjective, even though it's not a word, but I think it should be. But I want to disabuse us of thinking of this strictly in Taoist terms, because Taoism will come after this. Sun Tzu precedes Taoism. All of the Chinese landscape draw from the same, what I've called proto-Taoism in other texts, but in this context, what you can think of as sort of the pan-Chinese cornucopia of universal ideas. This would be similar. The analogy I draw is you can use the term spirit or soul in the Western world. Regardless of religious affiliation or background, almost all of us have some conception of that. It's a pan-Western cultural concept that we all share. In the same way, there are pan-Asian concepts that are shared, especially East Asian. And so yin-yang, which many of you are familiar with, mostly from Taoism, is one of these ideas. It predates Taoism and exists long before then. So many of these metaphors would be wrapped in those ideas. Many of these allegories would allude to sort of a yin-yang balance because it appeals to the Chinese mindset. So this pent-up dam bursting waters thousands of feet below, there's both a very yin and yang, action and water and chasm depths and great heights. You can see the yang and yin in that. But there are other subtler metaphors just lousy in this fourth book. Another comparison I just drew up a list as we were talking, was the comparison of stone and water. One of these is considered more yin, stone, versus the water, more yang. I know that sounds backwards, but yin means more substantial and yang is more fluid and active. Also, the idea of the Tao, which is where he ends this, is a much more yin idea than the idea of fa, method or law or direction. They balance each other as well. Heaven and earth, defend and attack. Even what Jason was talking about, these ideas of xing and shi, which are used as a single dual syllabic term to mean situation or concept or circumstance, form their own yin-yang pairing of xing being the more yin, what we just read, and what we're going to read next week, shi, the more yang. Not that it is active, but it is just about to be active. It is that pent-up dam with the first crack in the wall. All of that energy about to explode. I thought of many sort of common examples in the modern time, but out of all of these, and as much as I want to talk about Lennox Lewis knocking out Mike Tyson in 8 rounds in 2002, because that was a watershed moment in boxing where you saw yin defeat yang, I'd rather point out Patton and Marshall from World War II, 2 lions in Western US military history. But look at the aftermath. Patton stormed the beach at Normandy. Marshall was in charge of the the Pacific Theater. And then at the end of the war, what happened? We switched their places. Marshall wound up going and instituting the Marshall Plan for Western Europe. We haven't had until a year and a month ago a land battle break out in Western Europe since then. That's almost 4 generations. That's pretty impressive longevity, long-term strategy. Patton went to Japan and China, and then we had Korea, and then we had Vietnam, and we had nothing like a Marshall Plan there that worked as well. And so that sort of storm, that, you know, blood and guts Patton Yang may have been great for the end of battle, but when it came to securing peace, you needed a more yin Marshall. You couldn't have Patton do that. Yeah, I have many other analogies. I want to give everybody else time to speak. I will throw more thoughts out if the time becomes available, but thank you all, and I want to hear more of your thoughts.
Wonderful. Amazing, Amon. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next up is going to be David, Joe, James, Bill, and Ocean. David.
I thought that was interesting to start talking about keeping the peace and how generals are essential for that after a war process. So we haven't really talked about this in that light. That's a real door opening for me. I was just, what we just read about the pent up gallons of water, the thing that struck me about that was how it's actually a chaotic and somewhat destructive image. Well, it's an attacking army. And the idea that this is visualizing your own power in the process of achieving victory, that it's really achieving victory through a chaos and power, but it's under control by some complex calculation. Because to me, the idea of releasing this water into that deep valley and to be responsible for what's going to happen seems like such a feat of prediction. And, you know, in that sense, control of something, the scale of nature, that it's an amazing image to put in here. But it shows the respect for these 5 stages of preparation and measuring in quantity. I suppose, you know, as an engineer, you could actually flood the plane in the proper way without destroying everything around it if you really do this well. So it's a beautiful moment of description. And as far as you're right, I did notice in this, back in number 2, the second thing we wrote, defend as though from within the earth, attack as though from the heavens. And here we have the element of water, this release of power. So I don't see any fire in here yet. You would have expected fire in this discussion, but I see those 3 elements, each having their role and beautifully, poetically melded in. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next up is Joe, followed by James. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, my comments here are just, yeah, I think that the interesting thing is how everything is calculated and laid out for you, and it's a kind of a probabilistic approach to war, which makes sense. But I think that the interesting thing for me was, and I think everybody has spoken about the metaphor already, that the only thing I can add here is the idea where thus it is in his power to control success. And, you know, I think about that in terms of how that relates directly to number 1 and how we talked about that, and how it's basically we defeat ourselves if, you know, we don't properly prepare. So, I mean, that's pretty much all I'm going to leave my comments with.
Thanks, Joe. Next up is James, Bill, Ocean, and then we will go ahead and talk about metaphors in Chinese. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. I really think this is a good conclusion to the chapter, because it brings in this brilliant idea of controlling your options for success by using the military method. And the military method is to based on the ground, the ground being the earth, the situation that you're in, doing measurement, and then based on that, estimating quantities, the actual quantities available. Third, the calculations of power and power imbalances, and then the next step, of course, is the balancing of chances, which is statistical or theoretical analysis, where you create a number, you know, like from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 100 or whatever you like, you know, saying I have a 70% chance of defeating the enemy in this situation, or a 40% chance if the enemy has, if there's another situation, and so on and so forth. And then finally, what are your opportunities and chances for victory? So without going through these kinds of calculations and analysis, you're really not preparing yourself properly. You have to use that military method of analysis. And then I like the allegory of pent-up waters. It reminds me of the soldiers running downhill, essentially, you know, creating a kind of like a scare tactic to scare the enemy because of their power, numbers, and extra speed by running down the mountain. And that's the idea of releasing pent-up waters, just having overwhelming force and routing the enemy through getting to their emotions, as it were. So it's brilliant end to the chapter.
Thank you, James. Next up is Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. I want to explain a connection between the 2 most fundamental concepts in this chapter. One is the Chinese word, which has been translated sometimes as defense, but really better translated as invulnerability. Like even an attack plan or an attack operation can be vulnerable or invulnerable.
Can I just ask a clarifier? Are you talking about Bushang or are you talking about Shao?
I can't answer that question because I don't
Okay.
speak Chinese, but I'm referring to the parts of the English translations that used the word defense. But Jason said initially today that that doesn't quite capture it because it more talks about invulnerability, which was the word you introduced into the conversation today. So there's a connection between that and the other fundamental concept in this chapter, which is the Chinese word translated either as formation or disposition. So here's the connection. So it goes back to the earlier chapter that said all warfare is deception. So what enables General and Army A to be sure of victory before they even enter battle is when they have succeeded in deceiving General B and Army B into thinking either that they're far when they're near, or they're unable to attack when they are able to attack, or that they are internally disordered when they're internally well-ordered, etc. That's one part of it. But then the other part of it is discerning whether the enemy has bought the bait. And to do that, one has to send out spies and do various things. But one thing that one can do is read the enemy's disposition, their intentions, where the enemy thinks they are in the interaction, read it off of their movements of their forces, their formations, their physical dispositions of their forces in space, and use that as a way to read what the enemy's mental disposition is. What game do they think they're playing? What kind of, do they think that we're near or far, that we're capable of attacking or incapable, that we're well-ordered or disordered? And by reading off the enemy what game they think they're playing, one can tell when they think they're playing, one game when you're really playing a different game and you've got them exactly where you want them, and then you can let the flood of the waters go down and it all plays out like clockwork because they're caught in a place where they didn't want to be caught, and they've now realized that they had the wrong mentality about our side, and then it just defeating them completely at very low cost to oneself plays out like water washing over a waterfall. And I think that may be one reason he used that metaphor, because when a victory that's been pre-set up like that plays out on the ground, it just is like clockwork, and there is an inevitability to it. It's got its own laws of motion, like water has its own laws of powerful motion. So I wanted to close all those loops on all these elements of this chapter. Thanks for listening. I'll pass.
Great comment, Bill. Thank you so much. So we'll go for Ocean next, and then we'll go to the discussion of metaphors in Chinese. Go ahead, Ocean.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So two things, quick things, in order to respond to what Peter said about the martial arts and stuff. So, I've been giving examples, historical actual examples perfectly coincide with this teaching. However, I don't know, we're going to have free discussion at the end, but I'm going to just very quickly throw out that there are, as a Bible scholar, Shurikan, I'm sure you're familiar with it, story like David versus Goliath. Sometimes you cannot afford to wait and being patient and stuff. Sometimes you are forced to just fight against the enemies who's bigger than you. You have no choice. It's like I have a friend who is a fifth degree martial artist, and who mugged with a gun. Okay, but he had a military experience, so he just instantly disarmed the guy who's with the handgun, tried to mug him and disarm him. But he took the risk. There is no chance, even though he was a trained martial artist, there is no guarantee that he could disarm. He could be easily killed, but he took a chance and disarmed him. So there are situations that you cannot afford, you cannot really apply to this kind of teaching. So I would like to discuss that. And also, some people mentioned about the parallel between the Taoism and this kind of a teaching. And I've read the Tao Te Ching hundreds of times. I used to go meditate with a real Taoist master. And so I think I'm familiar with the Taoist teaching. So basically, the first thing is that anything you can name or label is not the Tao. In other words, the entire world is Tao, beyond your egos and labels and so forth. On the other hand, this is more like your intellect, yourself, your enemies, calculation. To me, it sounds the exact opposite from a Taoist way of perceiving the world. It's like all one, beyond your rationality, whereas this one is manipulative and calculation. So I want your help to help me to understand what's the parallel between Taoist teaching and this kind of teaching. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ocean. And then we'll have final comments now by Amon. You're welcome to address anything that you want, and then we'll go to Meta.
So I just want to say really quickly, to Ocean, I forgot to mention, he is absolutely right. I forgot to clarify, but I was talking about competition. And the Ocean's example is life and death. Remember when I said earlier, no matter what situation, you're effed, right? In the case of Ocean's friend, he chose the option which he believed he will be less effed in. So that's a different situation than competition where it's fair.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Amon.
That's a salient point. And I want to thank Ocean because as some of you are unfortunate enough know, I like nothing more than talking about Taoism. Taoism gets a lot of reputation for being pacifistic, but read it closely, it's not. It just advises that's always the better strategy, not the only strategy. And some of that is present here in The Art of War too. But like I said, they draw from the same well of sort of pan-Chinese ideas, and therefore there are going to be some similar feels every here and there. Though the Sun Tzu Bing Fa, the Master Sun's method or fa of military or fa of war, gives rise to a school of philosophy that we call legalism, or fajia, which is antithetical to a lot of the Taoist teachings, but also a lot of the Confucian teachings. It was very, very rewards and punishment pragmatism. There's not as much of that you'll read in the Tao Te Ching, but there is an element of pragmatism that exists there as well. And the metaphors of water crashing as a destructive force is a really powerful one that I think most Taoists could say, yeah, that's why it's good to be like water, because when you have to, when it absolutely positively counts, nothing will wear anything down more than water. Speaking of wearing things down, the other things I wanted to address, since there's a little time and I took notes, historicity. And this kind of ties in with something that Mark was asking about the empirical claim in the first verse. Empiricism and historicity, this sort of, are we talking facts? Are we talking fiction? Is very much a function of Western scholarship. In Eastern scholarship, it is not as paramount. And this goes to something Shrikant was asking about, the idea of metaphor. We have in the Western corpus a symbol, logarithmic, formulaic language. We take alphabets, put together letters, create words, those create language. So we have these formulas we follow, and we think in these very algorithmic terms of essentials. 1 + 1 must always equal 2. That's an essential truism for us. Chinese as a language is pictographic and metaphoric, and therefore does not necessarily hew to this formalism and essentialism that we have as part of our suppositional background in the Western world. Therefore, the question, was Sun Tzu real, is a question that somebody put this out before. Even without Jesus, you still have Christianity. The historicity is indifferent towards that outcome. And in the Chinese mind, even saying that statement, though, feels argumentative to us because we want that essential, true or not true. It's not as contentious within the Eastern world to say there was or wasn't a Sun Tzu, there was or wasn't a Lao Tzu, there was or wasn't a Kung Fu Tzu. I mean, there's a few Confucius who'd probably lose their mind, but for the most part, they would say those texts exist, those things were written, those things have been paramountly important to us culturally and have shaped us. And so that historicity actually isn't as important. And I do think there's a Sapir-Whorf component to it, that if you can think metaphorically and pictographically at the word level, where every single word is laden with metaphor, even that word shall. Somebody asked about, or Bill, I believe, was speaking about invincible, and I put that in the chat. Bul Kashang, no can victory. We just translate that into undefeatable or invincible. But the other word for defend, shao, is actually an image of a roof and an inch. And if you think of this idea of defend by thinking about patching a roof, every single inch of it must be covered to ensure that you don't get a wet head. Then this idea of defend or to guard against takes on a different level than if we were to simply put the combination of D, E, F, E, and D together and equal some abstract idea. China, as a country, as a kingdom, as a realm, was only ever conquered once by Mongols. And what happened within a generation? They became Chinese. And when I say they became Chinese, I mean lock, stock, and two smoking barrels. Language, culture, dress. They adopted every single bureaucrat into their dynasty. They called it a dynasty. It's in part of the dynasty. So as far as the empirical claims of, does this really work? Can you make yourself invulnerable in terms of defense? I think China is the case study that was so. And even in their one quote unquote failing, well, they just absorbed the attacker and made them theirs, made them a continuation of their dynastic system. So it's pretty hard to argue with 3,000 years of results. Those were the two big things I want to say. If any more time goes, I will talk Lennox Lewis and Michael and Mike Tyson's boxing match.